Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, where we hear what it was that gave them their sense or gives them their sense of identity and belonging. And every week you hear me say this, I say we've got a special guest, and every week I think that we deliver, and I know that this week we have a very special guest. We've got Professor Dilshad Sheikh, and she is the Dean of the Faculty of Business at Arden University. Dilshad, I'm so happy that you're with us this afternoon. I'm going to ask my first question, and that first question is, can you tell us something about what it was that gave you your sense of identity, your sense of belonging as you were growing up?
Okay, I think for me, definitely my father. So just to give the audience a little bit of a background on myself so that you can contextualize where I'm coming from. So I wasn't born in the UK. I was born in Africa, in Kenya, in Nairobi. I'm the youngest of 7 children, 6 girls and 1 son. The son is number 3. Yes, I've got that right. So 2 sisters and my son. And then what happened was my mom, so I'm actually mixed race. So my father is half African, half Arab, and my mom is Indian. And what happened when the British occupied India, she had a British passport and things weren't great. So all of us came over to the UK on my mom's passport. And when we did, back in the days, it was quite interesting being in the environment of the UK. And I say that because we were called so many labels. So, for example, on the playground, people used to ask me, "Oh, you're African. Where's Tarzan? Do you swing on trees?" I was called a coconut or a wannabe coconut. So, brown on the outside, white on the inside. So, because the family and in terms of school, and my father didn't have a job, he had to walk the whole of the West Midlands to get a job. I think my sense of belonging has come from my father because he saw the challenges we were facing as a family. So what he did, the 6 girls that he brought us up like men. And I'll say that again, the 6 girls that he brought us up like men because he instilled strength, resilience, just like if he had a son. Because culturally, often more than not, the girls are brought up in a particular way, and the son is the big macho man that looks after the family. All of my sisters and myself are independent because that's what was instilled. So it was my father, who I lost in 2012, who instilled that identity. I was also the only child to go to university, and that's through my father again. So he was trying to make enough money, obviously, to put food on the table. But equally, he thought because I was the youngest and there's 7 years difference between me and my sister, he actually invested a lot in my identity and developed me in terms of being resilient and standing up for myself.
So you're the youngest of 7.
Yes.
Right? 6 girls and 1 son, and 1 son. And as you said, that your father was instrumental in causing you to not settle with the status quo.
Yes.
Yeah, you. It sounds to me as though he really was there to tell you, not to tell you, but to show you that you're as good as, I'm going to say, you're as good as any man. Yeah.
Yes, pretty much. Because ordinarily what tends to happen, and again, you might say this is stereotypical, but the norm is you've got your daughters in my culture anyway, and then you've got your sons, and the sons are just brought up slightly differently in that they're the independent, they're the providers of the family, but all those characteristics and traits and experience were instilled into the 6 girls, so that we'd be resilient and we'd stand up for ourselves.
And I can already hear, just hearing from you, that your dad did a good job. He made sure that you were not just resilient, but that you stand up for yourself. Am I right with
Oh,
that?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, just I think, my journey in academia, it's been quite challenging, and people don't really believe me until they hear the story, because
Hmm.
you introduced me as Professor Dilshad Sheikh, Dean of the Faculty of Business. So I currently work at a commercial university called
Hmm.
Arden.
Hmm.
And within, I'd say, 6 months, I was promoted at Arden to Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor Academic. And you don't get many people that look
Yeah.
like me
Yeah.
who sit there, but that hasn't come without challenges.
Yeah.
And again, I keep mentioning that word resilience.
Hmm.
So I've had my fair share of setbacks,
Hmm.
where I was told I wasn't good enough for the job at a previous institution.
Hmm.
The title of professor was,
Hmm.
I feel I was robbed
Hmm.
from a previous institution. Um, and again, they are setbacks and knockbacks, but I've always been taught, if you fall, you dust yourself off and you
Yeah.
stand up again.
Yeah.
And that's what all the sisters do, and equally my brother as well. Because it is, there are systemic challenges for people that look like me.
Hmm.
And I always say I've got a double whammy because I'm female and I'm a female of colour.
Hmm.
Um, and I've felt, earlier on in my career, not at Arden, Arden's completely different.
Hmm.
The reason it's completely different is because we've got 30,000 students,
Hmm.
and 92% of those students are from widening participation, ethnic minority backgrounds,
Hmm.
and the average age of a student is 35 to 40.
Wow.
So when my students see me, they feel really inspired, because
Yeah.
they think, wow, I've come from a poor background.
Yeah.
I was raised in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the West Midlands.
Hmm.
Some of them have similar sort of I think they call it like polar characteristics in terms of where they're from. And then they look at me, and they look at my trajectory, and I tell them my story. And for me, it's very much about inspiring them. But as I said, people will say nothing's happened to you. Look where you are now. But it's taken almost 23, 24 years for
Yeah.
someone that looks like me compared to perhaps a white male counterpart.
It's interesting that you say about the demographics from where you came, and that this final, or this image that you have now, or the titles that you have now,
Yeah.
it wasn't just handed to you. You had to work, you had your setbacks. So can we kind of like, I want to just dress
Yeah.
back slightly, right? And ask about, when you were going through school, when was it that you kind of like thought to yourself, education is something that can help to empower me? Or
Okay.
yeah, when did
So
that come about?
So it didn't actually happen until I
Mhm.
was at university, believe it
Okay.
or not. Because
Mhm.
my dad, he was
Mhm.
always there. So I studied at Aston University. My
Mhm.
experience there as a student was absolutely fine. So
Mhm.
if the accent doesn't give it away, I'm from Birmingham. So an extremely diverse
Mhm.
community all around me as such. I think where it perhaps started is, in terms of education, probably when I was doing my master's.
Mhm.
And I also spent some time in France because my first degree was in business and French. So we had to do a year abroad.
Mhm.
And it was then. And then I think when I was in industry, so I haven't always been an academic, I went into industry for a while. And that was quite a few years ago. And that's where I faced quite a bit of discrimination. So I knew, for example, if I went for a promotion, I was either equally or more qualified than the next white candidate, but
Mhm.
then I wouldn't get the job. And then the feedback was just generic feedback, because I think it's really important when you don't achieve something, or you don't get appointed, or you don't get promotion, to get the feedback.
Yeah.
But it was just really generic feedback. And
Mhm.
that happened quite a bit because I moved around in industry.
Mhm.
And then I sat back and I thought, you know what? I've got my undergrad, I've got my master's, and I thought, let's go into education.
Mhm.
Um, but it was interesting going into education and academia because there were systemic barriers there as well in terms of progressing as a female of color.
That's really interesting that you say that there were barriers in the industrial side.
Yeah.
And it was very generic in the feedback that you were given. So there wasn't any chance even then for you to actually learn if there was anything wrong, because I probably suspect that there wasn't, but there wasn't even any clues to say this is what you could do to get the position next time.
No, nothing. No. So you just keep trying and trying. And then I guess what happened at one point is when you say there's a string of appointments or jobs that you've applied for and you don't get any of them, then all of a sudden imposter syndrome kicks in. And that was reinforced at a previous organization or university that I worked at, where again, people of color are not very welcome. And I was given a 5-page letter just out of the blue in terms of how poor I was at my job. So it was in black and white, 5-page letter. Don't know who appointed you as dean. Don't know who did this, but your shortfalls are this. I've tried to support. So, you get that letter where the person's actually being quite derogatory about your skills and experience and how the hell did you get here and who made you dean. But at the same time, trying to, well, there's support there if because clearly you need support. So it's really, that broke me. Yeah. That was a big crunch in 2018 for me.
So on the one hand, they say there's support, but really they're slapping you in the face.
Oh, big time. Yeah, big time. So I was actually so I shared the letter and I was actually asked and told, you know what, you need to go to tribunal. But you get to a point in your life, because I was a single parent at the time as well, 2 children, they were small, and I'm thinking, where do I focus my energy? Do I focus it on, tribunals take it forever, don't they, when it's something to do with racism, discrimination, or do I focus on my children? So I decided to focus on them. But that was a turning point in my life where I said, right, I'm never going to let this happen to me again. I think part of it is imposter syndrome, but I was intimidated as well. So senior white executives would intimidate me because of the fact that you've been told you're no good at what you do. So that, I always say that was in 2018. It was a big explosion. And I said, right, I remembered all the things my father told me. And I said, no, I'm not going to crumble and drop on my knees. So then the university where I worked at previously was deliberately restructured so that I was placed on redundancy. And then I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and the vacancy at Arden for their first ever dean came up, and I got the job. And I'm in an environment, because I never had that sense of belonging in previous institutions or in industry. But I think if you were to ask me what makes it different at Arden, the leader, so the vice chancellor, who is white, but absolutely fantastic and very supportive. But I feel at home at Arden because such a significant number of students are from ethnic minority backgrounds. As I said, from 30,000 students, 92% are from widening participation. We've shared, they get really shocked because I do a dean's welcome. And I'm honest, I'm like, you might be looking at, Professor Dilshad Sheikh, Dean, Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor, but I've come from where you've come from. And it's really interesting because most of them will have their cameras switched off. The minute I say I wasn't born here, English is my 4th language, just like it is for some of them, they start resonating and buying into what I have to tell them. And for me, it's about inspiring them and telling them, have that can-do attitude, because I've had all the negatives in my life.
Yeah. You know what? I love that. I normally ask, where did you get your sense of belonging from? But you've already just answered it in terms of, especially where you are in the workplace. It's that from if I'm hearing correctly, one of the things is about that intentional leadership, as well as the fact that the leadership recognizes you and values you
Yes.
for what you bring to the
100%.
table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm so passionate. It's, and you know what, why it is as well, Wayne? It's because of what I've experienced. You know, you compare,
Hmm.
and the value and the acknowledgement and the appreciation at Arden University is just second to none. You know, it's a
Hmm.
commercial provider.
Hmm.
People, you know, profit sharks. It's not. You know, we still are regulated by the OFS, by QAA, but
Hmm.
it's just the way the leader at the top, the culture that he's created. So, for example, as I mentioned before we joined the call, before you started recording and inviting the guests, um, we had graduation on Tuesday and it was absolutely magnificent. I have the honor of calling out all the students' names. And because, you know, we don't like to be too formal, so we'll still have the mace bearer. The mace bearer was actually a female of color,
Hmm.
and she's doing some research, and she said she was the first female of color to be able to carry the mace. um, and it was interesting because our vice chancellor was saying, you know, that they brought their children, and he said, when you're crossing the stage, be yourself, be your authentic self, and it just makes everybody else really comfortable. So in answer to your question, yes, everything I do is appreciated. I always get a thank you, and I'm thinking, well, I'm just doing my job, but it makes such a significant difference. Whereas before, I don't think what I did was appreciated. It was just looked in a like a tick box, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're there, you're making up the numbers, you're a female of color, and that was in industry as well.
Okay, so tell me how it is that it sounds to me that where you are at Arden, they give you they actively promote you, demonstrating your authenticity, your authentic self.
Mhm.
How does that make you? How does that make you feel?
I think it makes me feel valued, appreciated. Um, I think also in terms of like, you know, I'm always motivated to do as much as I can for our students. So number one stakeholder for me, all the students, and making sure they have an excellent student experience. And then of course, there's my academics as well. And
Mhm.
one thing I should mention, I've never worked in a university with so many diverse academics. I remember we had, you know, like at the start of the year, you have a faculty away day.
Mhm.
So we had ours in Birmingham. It was face to face because we're all spaced out remotely. I had a guest speaker. She herself is African Caribbean,
Mhm.
and she came in and she looked at of probably an audience of 200, and
Mhm.
even she mentioned this is the most diverse audience I've ever had in a
Wow.
university. And I think that is really important for students, that
Mhm.
they see themselves with those that are teaching them. But more importantly for me, they see themselves in the curriculum. And I
Mhm.
just wanted to give you one other example. So when I was appointed at Arden as Dean in November 2020,
Mhm.
all we had was one small school with
Mhm.
about 1,000, 2,000 students across Arden, and I inherited the business curriculum.
Mhm.
So I looked at it as you would, because you're new and you've been given a brief. And I said to my manager at the time, I said, oh, this curriculum is a bit too white, given the kind of students that we have at Arden.
Mhm.
Not taken back. She goes, okay, so what would you suggest? I said, I would suggest we revisit the curriculum. You know, we bring in guest speakers that look like the students, case studies, we bring in authentic assessment. So what I mean by that is, for example, you might have an African Caribbean entrepreneur around the corner. Let's use them as a case study.
Mhm.
So I did actually deliver to exec. I was very honest, very transparent, and they were so excited that
Mhm.
someone had actually come in, realized that this potentially could be an issue, and supported me to develop the curriculum that we have today. The other thing I did as well, Wayne, is with the support of my team, I created an inclusive or an excellence framework in inclusive curriculum that the
Mhm.
whole of Arden now uses to make sure that when we're designing our teaching content or our learning material, that it is inclusive and diverse, because I think sometimes we're guilty of making exceptions and having expectations or making assumptions that everybody knows how to be inclusive and diverse, and sometimes they don't. So
Yes.
we've put training in as well into play, and all this has been supported by the executive of Arden. So and you get complimented, it's like, wow, that's really working, etc. And it's a very different experience to what I've experienced differently. And I'm really, really, as you can hopefully tell, passionate about Arden,
Yeah.
because they support, they acknowledge, and they say thank you.
No, that's brilliant. I love the idea that bringing in, changing the curriculum to help it to reflect, help it to actually highlight that we can and we do make a contribution to the language and the lexicon of education. Because I think, as you said, the curriculum was very, very white, very Eurocentric. Yeah.
Yes.
And even that, I can't even say Eurocentric, because even there we have people of color in Europe, but yet their stories aren't always incorporated and included.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's that single step. And I love your story because it's a story of being empowered to empower others. Yeah. Because what you've got, from me, it sounds like you've got this passion. Yeah. But you've been allowed to fulfill that passion and to go with it. Whereas other people may not be given those opportunities.
Yep. And I think the other thing perhaps to mention, which is significantly different at Arden, and you feel that sense of belonging, because obviously you've got that at the back of your screen. It's the fact that the whole culture is very much into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's kind of driven by the stakeholders. Number one, the students. So it's not a tick box exercise for Arden or Dilshad's decolonize the curriculum. It's genuine. It's genuine emotion from the executive at the top. We're starting to audit some of our programs just to make sure, can we make them more diverse? Can we make them more inclusive? And it's really interesting because one could ask, well, what's the impact of that been? I can tell you what the impact has been. The impact has been in 2020 across Arden, we had 2,500 students. Now we've got 32,000 students in 3 years. We've been quoted as the fastest growing university because word has got out. We bring in Pakistani guest speakers, we bring in Europeans that can share their story and that resonate with the students. So we have actually narrowed our attainment gap. So again, when I joined, the attainment gap, the achievements between ethnic minority and white students was quite big. So it was a big initiative in our access and participation plan. And I'm pleased to say that that gap is going in the right direction, just by having a curriculum that engages the students and resonates with them, bringing in speakers from their backgrounds. We've had a speaker from a Caribbean background who was in prison. One of our honorary doctorates on Tuesday, his name is Swiss. It was on LinkedIn. He used to be a member of So Solid crew, and he's really engaged. He's really engaged in supporting entrepreneurs from ethnic minority backgrounds. And his story was brilliant because he said, my children don't know this. So in his speech, he actually said, I was suspended from primary school, expelled from secondary school, expelled from college, but here today I stand before you as an honorary doctorate from Arden University. So the point we're making is, not everyone comes from a privileged background, and most of our students don't. And it's that inspiration and giving them that aspiration to be the best that they can be at Arden, and it makes such a difference.
That's, I love that. I really love that, because that's about connecting, the connections which are being made, the connections to say, actually, and I've got this saying, respect it's respecting the individual's ability to say, you know what, we recognize that you have the opportunity to excel, right? And you've got specific talents, right, which will enable you to excel when you're given the opportunity. Yeah. And that's what it sounds to me that Arden is doing really well. In that, so I was going to ask you, but you answered the question when you said about, because you said that you inherited a small school, but then you said the impact of that was that you'd seen a massive increase in the numbers of people who are coming and joining Arden as a result, and not just joining, they're actually coming in and achieving. Yeah. You know, so that's brilliant.
And I think the other thing perhaps to mention as well, we're one of very few universities that take on students the non-traditional route. So some of our students literally come to us with nothing, no O levels, no GCSEs, no A levels. We don't recruit through UCAS like the traditional sector of universities does. So again, you know, when I was standing on stage on Tuesday announcing all the names, and some of them got the Dean's Prize and award for the highest performing student in terms of dissertations, it means so much to them, but it means even more to me because I've shared that background and I know how challenging it is. Some of them are single parents, you know, they've been in care homes or they've been looked after by carers, and for them, the opportunity wasn't there back in the days to, you know, obviously go to university on that academic journey. But that's what Arden does. You know, we talk about lifelong learning. It's exactly that. You know, again, I remember in the graduation in 2022, we had a 60-year-old who got a first class in business management. And when I was speaking to him, he goes, Dilshad, I just never had the opportunity. I had kids, grandkids, my kids were messing around, they were playing up in school. And he said, now that they're married and gone and got their own independent lives, I just wanted to go back to studying. So we very much believe in that lifelong learning, and we do take on students with literally nothing, and then they walk across the stage 3 years or 4 years later with a 2-2-2-1 and all these additional prizes as well.
Fantastic. You know what? I'm gonna dress back a little bit because I love what you're doing at Arden. I think that you're really making a difference to a lot of people's lives. I'm gonna just pull it back though, just slightly, because that's a lot of work which you're doing. I still want to know. I know your dad grew you up to be warriors, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
But there's one thing to be grown to be given that inner sense of, you know, you can achieve. But so many people will take that and they will say, they just internalize it and say, I can achieve, not necessarily thinking about we can achieve. And from the discussion that we've had, you've very much been focused on not just the individual achievement, but the achievement of everyone around. Where did that come from? Where does that come from for you?
I think it's about where it comes from. It's not always about the self, and I wouldn't want my students, because I am really committed to them because of where they come from, and you can see they try really hard. When they're, say, you know, enhancing their careers or they want to do a master's, I don't ever want them to feel the way I felt when obviously I was going through my sort of academic journey. And then, like I said, from university, I did actually go and work in industry. So it becomes we, because it's allyship, isn't it? We're all in it together. And what you will find as well, Wayne, I do quite a lot of keynotes about breaking barriers, smashing through glass ceilings, and the resilience aspect. And just to add another ingredient there, because as I said, in 2018, I was crushed in terms of what happened to me in my career. I think the other thing that I've probably done over the last 3 years, which Arden supports me to do, is become a bit more visible. So that I'm like I'm here now. You know, obviously, you know, people didn't know me before you introduced me today. So I do tend to represent Arden at various events, networking events, looking for guest speakers, looking for assessments, because in the Faculty of Business, all of the assessments are what I call live or authentic. So we use paper-based case studies to deliver the concepts and the theories, but the assessments themselves, we have live clients. So currently we're working with a digital agency that's not too strong at social media. So the marketing students are supporting a live case, because for me, it's all about practical learning for the students. But it became a while back, probably when I joined Arden. You know, before then it was probably, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But then I see the broader picture as you get more experienced and you, dare I say it, you get older. I see that wider picture. I see, you know, that the wave of my students where all of them really want to succeed, and they're, you know, they're giving up a lot. You know, A, because they're having to fund the degree themselves, but their backgrounds, you know, they, like I said earlier in the discussion, some of them are single parents, they've got children, and they're still achieving and working around that, coming to class. So for me, it is let's work this together and let's achieve the best that we can together.
I've got someone's put not someone, Rebecca's put a question in the chat for you. So I'm going to let Rebecca ask that question. I've got lots more, but I like.
Yeah.
So Rebecca, if you want to ask your question, please.
Yeah, if it's okay, I would also like to say my comment about something earlier. It was just around the importance of repopulating the curriculum and the example that you use. And I just wanted to say that it's important to have those role models for Black and minority ethnic students. It's also important to have that for the rest of the cohort. So the images of Black and minority ethnic individuals in successful positions can be normalized. So it's just a comment to just contribute to the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely right. I agree.
Yeah. The question that I had, because it's something I've been reflecting on as well, and especially because I've just submitted a funding application this morning around this, is how do you, or what tools maybe have you used to measure the impact or the success of some of the initiatives that you've put forward?
Okay, so because we're a commercial organization, OFS, so the Office for Students, they're a bit private provider, so they do come down on us quite heavily. So we've been focusing on the B3 outcomes, so continuation, completion, and progression, and we can see the data in enhancing. So just want to give you another example, Rebecca. So we've got quite a significant number of foundation year students, probably the most in the country, so 6,000. So these are the ones that've got no qualifications but really determined to achieve in their lives, even though it's a bit later on. So when I joined in 2020, progression, so or continuation as the language is used now, was probably 18%, 19%. So level 3 students moving to level 4 was really, really minimum. But having now had 3 years getting my hands on with the team, you know, I think that's really important. I haven't done it all myself. I've got an excellent team that I work with. We were looking at progression just this week, and it's nearly 70%. So more students are staying with us, more students are enjoying, and you know, it's that sense of belonging, that community that we've created. Because the other challenge Arden has, we have different campuses. So we've got 2 in Birmingham, 3 in London, 1 in Berlin. They're still part of us as well. 1 in Leeds, 2 in Manchester. So as you can imagine, because everyone's everywhere, that sense of belonging can be quite challenging to create. But we've done it really successfully because of the culture of Arden. It's not, oh my God, we need to, you know, demonstrate DEI because everybody else is and it's a tick box. We honestly believe in it, and it's embedded in everything that we do, absolutely everything we do. So for example, Arden University have sponsored the Multicultural Business and Community Champion Awards, and the category that we've sponsored is Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion. Now, we've not done it because, oh, look, Arden's sponsoring. We've done it to inspire our students, and we want to demonstrate to them, look, we're supporting widening participation communities, we're contributing to make them feel that sense of belonging and that they belong at Arden. So it's the data that we've used. Where were we in 2020? And we compare the trajectory, and we seem to be moving in the right direction.
That's fantastic. Rebecca, I don't know if you wanted to come back on that, but the example was brilliant.
Sorry, I don't want to. I'm not trying to seem challenging. I'm just asking because I am
No,
genuinely
ask.
interested. How is it? How do you sort of attribute the successes specifically to let's say repopulating the curriculum versus other initiatives that may be happening? So it may.
Good question. That's
Thank
not a
you.
challenging question. No, that's a really, you know, spot on question. So there are other things that are taking place as well. So I've tended to, in my discussion so far, talked about students because they're my passion. But even with staff, because we are very, very diverse as an academic body, not just in my faculty, but across Arden. And there's all sorts of work with like BAME networks, ambassadors, because you can only have a highly motivated student population if you've got a highly motivated staff base. So again, there's communities, there's celebrations, there's all sorts of activities that the staff and academics engage in, and again, which are very much supported by the culture of Arden. So I'd say those are the two key stakeholders. It's the students and it's the staff, but the academics are important because they are the ones in the classroom delivering the content and delivering the lectures. So we have training, so that's quite important. So we've got an academic professional development department where they put on training about how to be inclusive. I keep talking about gender and ethnicity, but of course I'm very aware, you know, you've got neurodiversity, you've got all the other protected characteristics as well. So all that we engage in, but from my perspective, in terms of my experience, that's what I'm talking about here. But again, this inclusivity framework does ask about, because we have quite a lot of material online, so different learner needs, neurodiversity, as I mentioned, disability, there's all those other sort of, you know, characteristics as well that need to be considered. But the two main stakeholders, students and staff, and everyone does their bit, and together is where we've, you know, managed to narrow the attainment gap.
So I'm going to just take back over. But Rebecca, thank you for those questions. They were brilliant. Because what I was also thinking, and Sarah's put this in the chat, I don't think that she can talk at the moment, but she says it's also an example of gatekeeping, or gatekeepers and decision makers, to see these success examples and to continue to in supporting opportunities for all, right?
Yeah.
In that, based on what you've done, as I like the way Sarah's put it, it's about giving people the opportunity to succeed.
Yes,
yeah?
100%. Yeah.
Opportunities to succeed. So it's that I've coined a phrase recently. I don't know if it's my phrase or somebody, and I heard it, and I'm going to steal it though. Yeah, I'm talking about the equity of opportunity, right?
Yes.
And what I think that you've demonstrated, because you've taken students who don't necessarily have the traditional A level and whatever else, but you're giving them the opportunity and saying, we are here to support you.
Yes.
You know? And I think that that's a real, I'm not saying it's a novel idea, but I'm saying that it's an idea that if more people would adopt, we would see better outcomes for everybody.
Yes.
You know,
Yep.
And so I continue to commend you on that. So how do you see Arden, or how do you see your place and your place at Arden developing further? What else would you like to see happen, do you think?
I think I'm probably going to sound like a typical dean, where every student achieves. and obviously the growth aspect. But I think in terms of anything that I want to instigate from a, you know, diversity, equity, inclusive, as an initiative, it's always supported. If I was working at a different institution right now, and you asked me that question, I would probably say I'd like the autonomy to engage with students and give them that opportunity, you know, like what we're doing at Arden, and not have gates and obstacles and all the rest of it. But I think, you know, Arden's absolutely fantastic, because every time someone comes with an initiative, they'll say, yeah, let's give it a go. You know, if we don't do it, we won't know what the outcome will be. We might have a missed opportunity. But I can see Arden's portfolio of programs and portfolio of students, as I mentioned, we've grown significantly fast from 2,000 in 2020 to over 30,000 now. And I guess it's word gets out that we are very well structured to support the more mature learner, because as I said, traditional universities average age is what, 18 to 25, what have you. So we've specifically designed our student support, academic support, the structures that we have within Arden, to support these students, and we want to give everybody an opportunity to access education. So that would have been my desire, but we're already doing it. As I mentioned, 60-year-old male got a first class in business management. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that story. All right, because it goes to show lifelong learning is real.
It is. Yeah.
You know, where everybody should be learning every day anyhow. But I think that active process to recognize, actually, I'm going to engage with this. I'm going to challenge myself at this stage. I'm not too old. I'm to learn something new and to stretch my mind. And I love that. I was going to ask a question, because you've seen this rapid expansion, right? I was going to say, how do you cope with that kind of scaling up, and still maintaining that quality that you had when it's easy? Sometimes it's really easy when it's just one or two, but when you then try to scale it up to 10 to 15, 20, 1,000, then that's where the problem starts. So how would you overcome that?
So how it works, we have 8 intakes a year, and because we're commercial, we know what the forecasts are. So for example, I know what the forecast intake is for February, which will be our next intake. So what you start doing is recruiting now for your lecturers. So, you know, our staff student ratio will be standard like any other traditional university, but it is making sure that we don't burst at the seams, because we have certain numbers of campuses, and we're opening a new campus in Nottingham as well. So to answer your question, we're given the forecast numbers well in advance, so we know how many extra lecturers we're going to have to recruit. So one could argue that most of us are just recruiting all the time, in terms of making sure we've got a good staff student ratio, and that students do have an intimate experience in terms of the classroom.
So it gives, again, it's maintaining that sense of identity, sense of belonging, not getting lost in the crowd. Then
absolutely, yeah.
I like that model. I do like that model. I do like that model.
And I think that the other thing as well, we don't use UCAS. So we have our own sort of business development team that recruit our students around the globe. And the other thing I should have mentioned is we have what we call blended learning. So you have face-to-face and a bit online, but we've also got distance learning students. So from the 30,000, about 10,000 of them are in 187 different countries, and they get to study in their own time. So again, you know, just to give you an example, when COVID happened, we were at ease, because we were already equipped to teach students online, asynchronous, synchronous. It was the other universities that had to quickly adapt in order to obviously deliver classes to students via online platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think sometimes maintaining that level of authenticity, that level of connection, online can be challenging. I know that. But it sounds as though, based on how you're doing it, the model that you've designed, you're able to accomplish that because the satisfaction levels from your students seem to be quite high.
Positive. And I think the reason being, and as Rebecca was mentioning as well, we've got a curriculum, so whichever program that the students are on, that connects with them. They can see themselves in the curriculum. And when that happens, you're more motivated, you understand slightly more, so you tend to submit your work, and hopefully, you know, you achieve higher. Your outcomes tend to be more positive.
Fantastic. You know, I'm gonna go for my final couple of questions, right?
Yeah, sure.
This is a double header, as it were. And the final two questions are: what advice would you have given to your younger self? That's the first part. And what do you think your younger self, looking at you now, would then turn and say, wow?
Okay, so the advice I would have given my younger self is not to be intimidated by seniority, because I was up until a certain point. And that doubting yourself, I can never be that, I can never be an exec, or whatever it is your ambition is. So I think, you know, I was intimidated by certain individuals and in certain situations. And if I was looking at myself as younger me, I think for my father and also for me, the epitome in terms of achievement was becoming a professor. So, you know, that was something my dad unfortunately didn't get to witness because he passed away in 2012. But the fact that I've gone through all the hurdles, the processes, wasn't conferred, even though I was invited to at a previous institution, and at Arden to finally have that dean position, deputy pro vice chancellor, but more importantly, the professorial conferment, because again, there's a lot of work to be done across the sector. I was reading, I've got a good friend and she's doing some research about Black professors as such, and apparently the 66th Black professor was appointed yesterday, and it was a LinkedIn post. But you know, there's probably about 8% of the population of professors are from ethnic minority backgrounds. So I think the most, if I was looking from a younger self to where I am now, I'd say probably it was the most challenging to get conferred, but that's what I'm probably the most proud of.
Fantastic. Dilshad, it's been fantastic having you as a guest, and I do want to get you down to Imperial in person. Yeah, because I think you are an inspiration. The work which you're doing is inspiration. It's about changing the narrative, and I think we do need to have more people changing the narrative to get greater inclusion. So I really want to just commend you and say, you know what, you got friends down here. We'll come up to London. We'll come up to Birmingham and definitely keep in contact, because I think there's a lot of learning from both parts.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So really
Brilliant.
big thank you. I'm just gonna share the screen and let people know what's going to be happening for next week. So next week we're going to have Christine Kinnair, and she's an award-winning founder and CEO of With Insight Education, and she's passionate about improving the perspective of Black heritage students. So she's going to be here next week from 12:30 to 1:30. And if you have missed any of the other episodes or other interviews, then please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. And you can catch up with many of the other interviews there. And I'm going to just end it by saying these are the first 100. We're almost at the second 100 guests who have shared their stories, shared their identity, shared their sense of belonging. And you know, it's so important that we communicate this, because you don't know who you're inspiring. You don't know who you're touching by giving them an opportunity to see, you know what, life isn't always a bed of roses, but we can make it, and we are making it. And as these people are testifying to, they are being a living example of what's helped them to gain that sense of belonging. So I just want to say another big thank you. We are now in December. Christmas is coming soon, but you know what? Just keep doing what you're doing and keep finding that place and that sense of belonging. And until next week, have a good weekend, and I will see you very, very soon.